Flight 287's engines roared to life as Denver International Airport's morning sun reflected off its sleek fuselage. 92 passengers had boarded for the short journey to Seattle, most expecting nothing more than a routine 2-hour flight. The cabin buzzed with ordinary chatter, families discussing weekend plans, business travelers reviewing notes on laptops, a few students laughing quietly over earbuds. Captain Laura, a 17-year veteran pilot known for her calm demeanor, ran a final checklist with First Officer Blake. The autopilot system hummed quietly in the background, and the plane taxied toward runway 26R. Passengers glanced out the windows as Denver's skyline receded, clouds stretching like soft blankets across the horizon. A young boy pressed his forehead against the glass, mesmerized by the sensation of lifting from the earth. Across the aisle, his mother adjusted her daughters, unaware of the tension subtly creeping into the cockpit. Laura's fingers danced over the controls with practiced ease, exchanging a quick, professional smile with. Both pilots had flown hundreds of flights together, and their silent communication required no words. A glance, a nod, a slight tilt of the head could convey a world of information. In the cabin, flight attendants moved down the aisles with precision, offering drinks and checking safety equipment. One attendant, Lisa, noticed a middle-aged man staring intently at his phone screen, earbuds dangling. "Everything okay, sir?" she asked with a practiced smile. He nodded quickly, eyes darting around the cabin as though sensing something out of place, though nothing appeared unusual. Most passengers were blissfully unaware that the calm surface of this morning flight hid a potential storm. As the plane ascended, the city shrank below, the hum of the engines a constant reassurance. A few passengers dozed, lulled by routine comfort and the rhythmic vibrations through the seats. Others stared at the clouds, imagining what lay beyond. Laura adjusted the altimeter, checking fuel levels and flight path, her eyes scanning the horizon through the cockpit window, monitored the instruments, noting wind patterns and the slight deviations from standard headings. Everything was normal, routine, predictable, safe. But somewhere deep within the cockpit, an almost imperceptible change occurred. A valve, part of the plane's pressurization system, had begun a slow, almost invisible malfunction. It would be hours before anyone on the ground could detect it, and only minutes before passengers and crew would feel its effects. For now, the plane glided effortlessly at 35,000 feet, autopilot engaged, carrying 92 lives with quiet assurance. Back in the cabin, conversations continued. A young couple discussed weekend hiking plans, while an elderly woman knitted quietly, humming a tune from decades ago. A business traveler typed furiously on his laptop, occasionally glancing out the window as clouds passed in hypnotic rhythm. Flight attendants smiled and moved efficiently, ensuring everyone's needs were met. The sense of safety was palpable. The passengers trusted the routine, the professionalism, the monotony that made commercial flights so comforting. Yet even in such ordinary circumstances, tension has a way of building invisibly. In the cockpit, Laura adjusted the throttle and checked the communication channels, preparing for the routine handoff to Seattle's air traffic controllers. Her hands moved with effortless precision, a testament to years of training and experience. Mirrored her movements, attentive, ready for anything. From the outside, nothing hinted at the looming disruption, the fragile line between ordinary and catastrophic that separated safety from disaster. As Flight 287 climbed toward cruising altitude, the first hints of unease, a flicker of cockpit light, a minor hesitation in the instruments, went unnoticed by most. Passengers sipped coffee, typed emails, or stared dreamily at the clouds. In these moments, life seemed predictable, ordinary, secure. Yet within the mechanics of steel, glass, and circuitry, an invisible threat had begun to whisper, a silent prelude to chaos. And soon, that whisper would grow into a roar that no one on board would forget. 30 minutes into the flight, the atmosphere in Flight 287 began to shift subtly. Passengers, still absorbed in their routines, had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. Yet in the cockpit, An almost imperceptible tension had taken hold. Captain Laura, normally vigilant and communicative, hadn't spoken over the intercom in several minutes. First Officer Blake glanced sideways at her, noticing her unusual stillness. At first, he thought she might simply be focused, deep in concentration as she monitored instruments, but the sense of unease only grew. In the cabin, flight attendants began noticing small irregularities. The cockpit door, usually opened briefly for routine communication, remained firmly closed. Lisa, the lead attendant, exchanged a worried glance with her colleague. "She's not coming out," she whispered. The co-pilot's silence on the intercom amplified the discomfort. Passengers, sensing the lack of announcements, grew slightly restless. The gentle hum of the engines no longer provided comfort. It now sounded hollow, as if echoing the uncertainty in the air. Turbulence struck unexpectedly, a sharp jolt that rattled trays and shook the plane briefly. Coffee cups wobbled, laptop screens flashed warning icons, and a young child began crying, startled. The signs illuminated, though no explanation came. Flight attendants hurried to reassure passengers, checking straps and calming nerves. Still, their eyes betrayed concern. Something felt off, though neither they nor the passengers could articulate it. Carl, a retired Air Force mechanic seated near the rear, noticed subtle deviations on the in-flight display. The plane was drifting slightly northwest, not along the expected flight path. Tried calling Laura over the headset. "Captain, can you respond?" Silence. He repeated the request, increasing urgency in his voice. Still no response. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he tried to assess the situation. The autopilot continued to hold the plane's altitude and heading, but it was clear something was amiss. Tapped lightly on her shoulder, then again, receiving no reaction. Panic was still under the surface, but fear had begun its quiet creep. Passengers, oblivious to the technical details, began feeling unease. Conversations died out. Nervous glances darted across rows. The flight attendants moved faster, attempting to maintain normalcy while internally questioning what could be happening in the cockpit. A young woman clutching her purse whispered to her friend, "Why hasn't anyone said anything? Isn't the pilot supposed to talk to us?" Anxiety started spreading like wildfire, infecting the air with an invisible tension that no one could name. Carl stood up, trying to assess the instruments. "We're off course," he muttered, voice low but firm. A few nearby passengers leaned in to see, confusion etched across their faces. "Is it normal to be drifting?" a businessman asked nervously. Carl shook his head, unsure how to explain the technical details without inciting panic. Flight attendants were now fully aware something was seriously wrong, yet protocol prevented them from opening the cockpit door themselves. They tried the intercom, calling the cockpit repeatedly. Silence answered each attempt. Outside, clouds glided peacefully, masking the drama inside. The plane seemed calm, ordinary, almost serene from the outside. But within, tension had escalated. Each second felt stretched, heavy, almost tangible. Hands shook slightly as he wrestled with the idea of what might happen if Laura did not respond. The subtle mechanical warning indicators began to flicker occasionally, small and easy to miss, but ominous in their significance. Every passenger's heartbeat, every nervous glance, every whispered question carried a growing weight. By now, a quiet panic had settled into the cabin, even as most passengers tried to ignore it. Flight attendants moved quickly, offering reassurance they themselves barely felt. The plane's hum, once comforting, now seemed like a hollow echo. In the cockpit, continued to call, trying to shake Laura gently, finally realizing that this might not be a temporary lapse. Something critical was happening, and every moment lost brought the plane closer to disaster. The first signs were clear, but no one fully understood the scale of the danger yet. Back on the ground, Denver Center's radar screens flickered under fluorescent lights, tracking Flight 287 as it cruised steadily at 35,000 feet. Controllers expected routine responses from the crew, but received nothing. "Flight 287, Denver Center, please respond," the operator called repeatedly into the radio. Static was the only reply. The seconds stretched unbearably, the hum of the monitors punctuated by beeping alerts. Protocol demanded escalation after 60 seconds of silence, yet controllers hesitated, reluctant to panic. Every person in the room felt the tension crawling along their spines. Something was wrong, and the unknown amplified fear. In the cockpit, Blake's heart raced as he tried again. "Captain, respond." His voice trembled slightly over the intercom. Laura remained slumped, eyes closed, barely breathing. Training kicked in, forcing him to stay calm, though adrenaline surged. He reached to tap her shoulder gently, then lightly shook her, trying not to jostle the plane. The autopilot hummed, keeping the plane aloft, but he knew that without human intervention soon, the situation could deteriorate catastrophically. The instruments flashed minor warnings, pressure fluctuations and oxygen level alerts, but attention was entirely on Laura. Meanwhile, in the cabin, nervous whispers grew louder. Carl, the retired Air Force mechanic, had stood and peered toward the cockpit, noticing subtle deviations on the navigation display. "We're drifting northwest," he murmured, voice low but urgent. Passengers leaned closer, confused, exchanging worried glances. A young woman clutched her child, her nails digging into the leather seat. Lisa, the lead flight attendant, called out for calm, but her voice quivered. The eerie quiet from the cockpit, so unlike the usual announcements and chatter, had everyone on edge. People instinctively tightened there, bracing for something none could yet define. On the ground, Denver controllers tried multiple channels, escalating through emergency frequencies. Flight 287 respond immediately. All channels, still nothing. A supervisor activated backup communication, looping the call through multiple frequencies, but static persisted. Eyes flicked to the radar. The plane held altitude but veered slightly off course, a slow drift that alarmed even the most experienced operators. Nearby flights were rerouted, and NORAD was. The realization hit. This was no ordinary lapse. A potential incapacitation event loomed. Inside Flight 287, tension mounted. Struggled to keep Laura upright, his mind racing through every emergency protocol he had memorized. Cabin crew whispered, attempting to reassure passengers while their own anxiety grew. Carl noticed the oxygen masks had not deployed. "We may need them soon," he warned, moving toward passengers and preparing for the worst. The hum of the engines no longer comforted anyone. It seemed almost ominous. Every vibration, every flicker of light felt, each one a reminder that time was slipping. Passengers began noticing subtle changes in the environment. The air felt thinner, cooler, somehow different. A young man near the window asked his neighbor nervously, "Do you feel that?" The reply was a whispered, uncertain, "Yeah, something's wrong." Murmurs spread like wildfire. The first real wave of fear had hit, quiet but palpable, infecting the cabin. Flight attendants moved swiftly, checking straps, preparing oxygen masks, calming the crew and passengers alike. The plane's gentle glide seemed increasingly deceptive, hiding the growing crisis within the cockpit. As minutes passed, realized the severity of the situation. Laura had been incapacitated by a sudden drop in oxygen. He alone could maintain control, but only barely. Every decision, every adjustment mattered. Outside, the sky remained calm, the sun reflecting off clouds as if nothing were happening. Inside, fear and responsibility weighed heavily, pressing against him like a physical force. Each heartbeat was a countdown. Each breath reminded him how quickly life could change at 35,000 feet. Time stretched. Denver Center grew more frantic. Focus sharpened to every instrument, every gauge. Outside, the world seemed unaware of the quiet terror unfolding above. Inside Flight 287, 92 passengers sat on the precipice of chaos, their lives tethered to a single man's courage. The dead channel, once a minor anomaly, had become the first signal of a true emergency, one that would test nerves, skill, and resolve like never before. The cabin of Flight 287 had transformed from ordinary comfort into a cage of unease. 92 passengers, still seated, now whispered nervously among themselves. The hum of the engines, once a reassuring constant, now felt like a hollow echo amplifying their fear. Flight attendants moved briskly up and down the aisles, offering smiles they did not feel, checking and oxygen masks, their eyes flicking constantly toward the cockpit. Lisa, the lead attendant, felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. She knew something was terribly wrong, yet there was nothing she could do alone. Carl, seated near the back, had stood again, studying the plane's in-flight display. "We're veering northwest," he said quietly, almost to himself, eyes scanning the cabin. Nearby passengers leaned in, faces pale, murmuring anxiously. A mother clutched her child, whispering reassurances she barely believed herself. The flight attendants tried to maintain calm, but even their practiced gestures betrayed concern. The locked cockpit door loomed ominously in the front, a barrier between normalcy and chaos. The passengers' growing unease was contagious. Conversations had dwindled to a few nervous whispers, punctuated by the occasional clatter of a tray table or shifting luggage. Some passengers attempted rational explanations, dismissing their fear as imagination, but Carl's knowledge and demeanor gave weight to his words. "Something's wrong. They're not responding," he said firmly. Others turned to him, eyes wide with uncertainty. A businessman, usually calm under pressure, muttered, "Shouldn't there be some kind of announcement? Isn't it protocol?" The young couple across the aisle exchanged worried glances, silently acknowledging that the absence of communication meant more than anyone wanted to admit. The atmosphere thickened as turbulence rattled the plane again. Trays and laptops shifted slightly, and the hum of engines fluctuated. Passengers clutched armrests, a few grasping at each other for comfort. The young boy pressed his face to the window, wide-eyed, sensing the tension without understanding it. Flight attendants moved methodically, securing items, checking belts, speaking in soothing tones that barely concealed the anxiety rising within them. Each creak and shudder of the fuselage felt amplified, every flicker of overhead light feeding fear. Carl made his way toward the cockpit, stopping short of the locked door. He observed struggling to keep Laura upright, witnessing the co-pilot's silent effort to maintain control. The realization hit Carl was alone responsible for 92 lives. He returned to the cabin, sharing quiet instructions with the flight attendants. "Prepare everyone for the worst, just in case," he whispered. Lisa nodded, moving swiftly, her voice steady though her heart raced. Passengers watched, some aware of the severity, others still clinging to hope, none fully understanding the peril they faced. A young woman whispered to her friend, "Why isn't anyone talking? Why aren't we being told what's happening?" Her friend shook her head, eyes wide. Murmurs grew louder as more passengers noticed subtle changes, the thinning air, the slight chill creeping through the cabin, the absence of the captain's reassuring announcements. The plane, for all its modern technology, seemed fragile in that moment. Each person felt their heartbeat as if it were echoing through the fuselage, the invisible tension pressing down from the cockpit. His focus remained unbroken in the cockpit, but even his concentration could not prevent the growing fear in the cabin. He signaled to flight attendants as best he could, guiding them without words. Oxygen masks remained unused, tension mounting with each passing second. Outside, the sky was serene, clouds drifting peacefully, masking the chaos unfolding within. Inside, survival depended on calm under pressure and quiet coordination, an invisible thread connecting crew and passengers through fear and determination. As Flight 287 drifted slightly off course, passengers began realizing the severity of the situation. Whispered conversations became stifled cries of worry. Flight attendants reassured them, while internally they were counting every heartbeat, every jolt of turbulence. The cockpit door remained shut, a grim reminder that control was concentrated in the hands of one brave co-pilot. Each second stretched painfully, and the cabin became a microcosm of rising tension, fear, and uncertainty, teetering on the edge of chaos. On the ground, Denver Center had escalated the situation. NORAD received the alert, an unresponsive commercial aircraft carrying 92 passengers, drifting slightly off course, autopilot engaged. 2 F-16 fighter jets scrambled from Oregon, engines roaring, piercing the sky as they raced to intercept Flight 287. The cabin had descended into quiet panic. Passengers gripped armrests and each other, whispering prayers and hoping anyone, would regain control. The hum of the engines was no longer reassuring. It had become a backdrop to fear, a subtle countdown of mounting tension. Suddenly, the oxygen masks dropped with a soft thud. Panic erupted. Mothers clutched children tightly, elderly passengers struggled to keep calm, and nervous murmurs echoed through the cabin. Lisa and the other flight attendants worked frantically, demonstrating the correct way to use the masks, speaking in calm, steady voices, even as their own hearts raced. Struggled in the cockpit, adrenaline coursing through his veins, knowing that Laura's condition left him alone at the controls. Every action mattered. Every second was a fragile balance between survival and disaster. Carl stood near the cockpit, offering quiet guidance. "We have to stay calm," he said firmly. "Follow instructions. He's trying to control the plane." Passengers clung to hope in his voice, clinging to any indication that someone was working tirelessly to save them. Outside, the F-16s flew alongside Flight 287, their pilots signaling through practice maneuvers. He recognized the instructions immediately. Follow the lead, match speed, align for guidance. It was as if the military jets had become angels, silently guiding the plane through the chaos of the stratosphere. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted throttles, monitoring instruments and balancing the delicate trim of the aircraft. His eyes flicked to Laura, slumped against the seat, and then back to the controls. Each adjustment, each microsecond of decision-making, could determine whether the plane remained aloft or spiraled into disaster. Passengers felt the subtle changes in motion, slight dips, minor shudders, without knowing why. The tension in the cabin was palpable, every breath a reminder that life hung in the balance. The F-16 pilots communicated with hand signals, guiding toward an emergency airstrip near Spokane. The runway appeared distant but visible, a sliver of salvation on the horizon. He followed the lead, maintaining careful control, adjusting for wind and altitude. Every movement had to be precise. Oxygen levels fluctuated as the plane descended gradually, adding pressure to an already unbearable situation. Carl and the attendants moved down the aisles, helping passengers secure themselves, whispering encouragement, trying to instill calm even as their own nerves frayed. As the aircraft descended, turbulence increased, sending small items tumbling and causing minor jolts. Fought the controls, muscles straining, sweat streaming down his face. The passengers felt every shudder, every tilt, their stomachs lurching with the plane's subtle movements. Children whimpered softly, some clutching parents' hands, while adults muttered quiet prayers. The plane had become a vessel of hope and fear intertwined. One man near the rear clasped his hands tightly, repeating, "Please let him make it. Please let him make it." Time seemed elastic, stretching impossibly as Flight 287 approached the emergency strip. His focus sharpened to a singular point, tuning out every sound except the instruments and the faint signals from the fighter jets. Carl's eyes scanned the cabin, silently encouraging passengers to brace for landing. The oxygen masks had done their job, but fear had not dissipated. Every second felt like an eternity. Survival now depended on one man's courage, skill, and composure, tempered by guidance from the outside. The runway glinted faintly ahead, an island of salvation in a sky that seemed endless. Adjusted, nudging the plane into perfect alignment, knowing that a miscalculation could be catastrophic. In the cabin, the tension was absolute. 92 lives depended on his next moves. The mid-air decision had been made. He would follow the jet's lead, trust his instincts, and descend, no matter the risk. For the passengers of Flight 287, hope clung to each heartbeat, each breath, each calculated movement. The runway near Spokane grew slowly larger in the windshields of Flight 287. Blake's knuckles whitened as he adjusted throttles and trim, fighting the plane's subtle deviations. The F-16s flanked him on either side, guiding him with precise hand signals, their jets cutting a path through the soft clouds. Inside the cabin, every passenger sensed the approaching climax of the crisis. Hearts pounded, breaths quickened, and hands gripped armrests as the plane dipped and shuddered slightly, responding to precise yet tense adjustments. Each jolt echoed like a drumbeat of survival. Flight attendants moved down the aisles with urgent efficiency, helping passengers buckle in tightly. "Brace positions, hold on," Lisa shouted, her voice cracking slightly under pressure. Children screamed softly, clutching parents, some pressing their foreheads into laps, others burying faces in hands. Carl stood near the midsection, whispering calm instructions. "Stay calm, follow their lead, he's keeping us in the air." His words offered small comfort, though fear remained thick in the cabin. The gentle hum of the engines was now a tense soundtrack to the life-or-death struggle taking place just ahead in the cockpit. Focused intensely, scanning instruments and listening to the faint crackle of radio static, he adjusted flaps, trimmed controls, and carefully managed airspeed. One miscalculation could send the plane skidding off the runway or worse. The pressure of 92 lives pressed against him like a tangible weight. Laura, slumped and unconscious, sat silent beside him, a haunting reminder of the stakes. Adrenaline surged, every muscle taut with focus, every breath measured. Outside, the wind whistled past the cockpit, carrying the faint smell of ozone from the fighter jets' afterburners. Passengers watched the runway grow beneath them, a strip of salvation stretching through the pale morning haze. Carl and the attendant spoke quietly, urging calm, helping terrified travelers remain seated. "Keep your heads down, arms tight," Lisa repeated, moving along the aisle. A young boy whimpered softly, his mother clutching him to her chest. Even adults who had faced life's challenges whispered prayers under their breath. The plane's slight sway with wind gusts made the landing feel almost impossibly tense. Those hands remained steady, guided by training, instinct, and the signals from the jets beside him. Turbulence worsened as they approached the airstrip. Gusts rocked the plane, sending loose items sliding across the cabin. Flight attendants moved swiftly to secure trays, laptops, and carry-on luggage. Passengers clenched jaws and fingers alike, bracing for impact. The F-16's guidance was flawless, a silent choreography that provided with confidence even as his pulse raced. Every decision, flap adjustment, throttle nudge, trim correction, was amplified by the awareness that failure meant catastrophe. Each heartbeat echoed in the cabin as passengers prayed silently for survival. The plane's descent became more rapid as the emergency strip drew nearer. Adjusted for wind shear, keeping the nose slightly raised to prevent a hard impact. Outside, fire trucks and emergency crews lined the runway, hoses ready, engines rumbling, anticipation mirrored in the faces of the first responders. Inside, passengers' faces were pale, eyes wide, bodies tense, muscles clenched. Carl whispered encouragement, ensuring no one panicked. Oxygen masks hung unused now, but fear itself acted as a suffocating presence. Every second seemed stretched, fought fatigue and panic simultaneously, balancing fear with calculated action. The F-16 slowed slightly, signaling the final approach. The runway loomed directly beneath, a narrow strip of salvation across open land. Adjusted flaps one final time, nudged the throttle gently, and aligned the plane perfectly. 92 souls teetered on the edge of disaster, trusting the hands of a single co-pilot. The descent was controlled, precise, a high-stakes ballet of steel, courage, and skill, every moment a heartbeat closer to life or disaster. The runway of the Spokane Emergency Airstrip filled the cockpit view, growing larger with every second. Blake's hands gripped the controls tightly, his knuckles white, eyes fixed on the tarmac ahead. The F-16s flanked him, guiding, signaling, their presence a lifeline in the tense final moments. Outside, emergency crews lined the strip, engines humming, hoses ready, eyes locked on the descending aircraft. Inside, 92 passengers braced for what could either be a miraculous salvation or a catastrophic disaster. Every heartbeat in that cabin seemed to echo like a drum of impending fate. The plane shuddered as lowered the landing gear. A flash of alarm crossed the instrument panel, right gear failure. Panic flashed briefly in his chest, but training, instinct, and adrenaline surged stronger. He adjusted throttle and flaps, keeping the plane steady despite the imbalance. Turbulence buffeted the fuselage, rattling tray tables and luggage. Passengers clutched armrests, some burying their faces in their hands, others clutching loved ones tightly. The whimpering of children and the muffled prayers of adults filled the cabin as fought to keep the plane aligned with the narrow strip. Flight attendants moved with intense focus, securing passengers, shouting instructions over the din. "Stay down, brace, hold tight." Lisa's voice was steady, though her heart pounded. Carl moved through the cabin, whispering reassurance while guiding nervous passengers to proper brace positions. Every jolt of the plane, every lurch in turbulence, intensified the fear. His mind operated in perfect, high-pressure focus. Flap adjustments, throttles, rudder corrections, small nudges of the wheel, all measured precisely against a backdrop of wind, gravity, and mechanical uncertainty. The emergency crews on the ground braced, hoses and fire extinguishers at the ready. Smoke trucks rumbled, lights flashing, engines roaring. The runway seemed impossibly narrow, yet adjusted meticulously, every movement deliberate. The F-16 pilots hovered momentarily, signaling encouragement before peeling off, leaving to land the plane alone. His breath was shallow, yet calm, every muscle engaged, every decision critical. One wrong movement, one misjudged throttle adjustment, could send 92 lives spiraling into disaster. As the plane's belly approached the asphalt, the right wheel skidded slightly. Sparks flew and the fuselage screeched against the tarmac. The cabin jolted violently, throwing passengers forward despite their. A wave of noise, screams, metallic scraping, alarms filled the air. Cut engines, forcing the plane to slow gradually. Fire trucks sprayed foam along the sides as the fuselage skidded. The left wheels touched firmly, dragging the right slightly off balance, but the plane held. 92 lives hung on the edge of survival, teetering with each meter along the runway. Inside, the cabin was chaos restrained. Flight attendants guided passengers to exit, their calm voices cutting through the terror. Carl helped a young mother with her child, whispering encouragement. "We made it, we're okay, stay calm." Adults hugged each other, tears mingling with relief and disbelief. Eyes remained on the runway until the plane finally slowed to a halt, engines silent. The deafening roar of the outside crew filled the momentary silence, a chorus of relief washing over everyone aboard. Passengers stumbled out, blinking in the sunlight, faces pale but alive. The young boy clutched his mother's hand, trembling but safe. Carl exhaled deeply, gripping the shoulders of a nearby passenger in quiet solidarity. Flight attendants guided the shaken but alive passengers away from the aircraft, their training having kept chaos at bay. Climbed out last, legs trembling, sweat streaking his face, but he remained upright. The plane, battered but intact, had given 92 people a second chance at life. News crews would later capture the scene. Fire trucks, emergency personnel, and survivors hugging, faces streaked with tears. Survivors would recall the tension, the fear, and the near-impossible landing that had saved them. Blake, quiet but determined, would later shrug off accolades, knowing the landing was only possible because of careful calculation, courage, and instinct. Flight 287 had survived a near disaster, and every passenger stepped into daylight forever changed. Hours later, the emergency crews had cleared the runway, and Flight 287 sat silently, battered but intact. Passengers shuffled into buses, wrapped in blankets, whispering prayers of relief. The adrenaline that had gripped their hearts for over an hour now ebbed slowly, leaving a mix of exhaustion, disbelief, and gratitude. Children clung to parents, adults embraced strangers, and Carl finally allowed himself to breathe deeply. Every soul on that plane had experienced fear at its most visceral, and survived. Investigators arrived swiftly, combing through the wreckage and reviewing cockpit recordings. The cause, when revealed, stunned many yet made terrifying sense. A faulty pressurization valve had starved Captain Laura of oxygen mid-flight. The incapacitation had been sudden and silent, leaving First Officer Blake alone to pilot the aircraft. His calm, precise decision-making, aided by the guidance of the fighter jets, had saved all 92 passengers. The technical fault was invisible to passengers, nearly imperceptible to routine instruments, yet it had nearly claimed lives in an instant. Spoke quietly with investigators, recounting the critical moments of the flight. His focus had never wavered and his every action had been dictated by training and instinct. "I didn't save anyone," he said softly, almost to himself. "I just didn't stop trying." His humility masked the immense courage it had taken to wrest control of the plane while under unimaginable pressure. Every adjustment, every micro-decision, had required precision, timing, and nerve. Those on board could attest. He had done far more than simply not stop trying. Passengers were debriefed, some in disbelief, others in tears. Many hugged, their hands shaking, voices choked with emotion. Carl stood nearby, quietly nodding in approval, proud that his own interventions, calm instructions, reassurances, had helped maintain order. Flight attendants were lauded for their composure, their ability to calm passengers while internally facing terror. The young boy's mother whispered a trembling thank you, clutching him tightly, knowing that without the efforts of these few, survival would have been uncertain. The media quickly caught wind of the story. Headlines hailed Blake as a hero, the man who had landed Flight 287 under near-impossible conditions. Television broadcasts replayed footage of the emergency landing, smoke curling from the fuselage, passengers staggering into sunlight, fire crews surrounding the aircraft like guardians. Yet deflected the attention, crediting the F-16 pilots, the flight attendants, and the fortunate combination of training and luck. For him, the story was never about accolades. It was about survival, about keeping 92 lives from slipping away. As the adrenaline faded, passengers reflected on the surreal experience. The ordinary morning, the routine flight, had transformed into a test of courage, instinct, and human resilience. People who had been strangers now shared an unspoken bond forged at 35,000 feet. The quiet moments of terror, the uncertain silence of the cockpit, the roar of emergency engines, all left an indelible mark. Each passenger carried a private story of fear, hope, and gratitude that would linger long after the news crews departed. Laura, recovering in the hospital, remained unaware of the magnitude of actions for a brief period. When she learned what had occurred, she wept not from fear but from awe. Her trusted co-pilot had, in a matter of minutes, made decisions that balanced life and death, guided by instinct, skill, and courage. She would later describe the incident as the ultimate test of trust and human determination. For the flight remained etched in memory. Every instrument reading, every decision, every heartbeat of the passengers, frozen in his mind as if replayed in slow motion. The truth at 12,000 feet was that survival often depends on a single individual refusing to surrender, even when faced with silence, uncertainty, and near-certain disaster. Flight 287 had become a testament to human courage, a story of fear overcome, of life preserved against staggering odds. 92 passengers had survived, and for a brief, intense hour, humanity had held its collective breath and emerged intact. The echoes of the flight would linger forever, a reminder that heroism can manifest in quiet determination, in steady hands, and in a refusal to give up when all else falls silent.